Hi, good morning. It's a great Saturday and we welcome you to a class on English for IBPS. And today we will be doing an entire class on reading comprehension. Okay, so I understand that there's been a slight delay at our end, but we are facing some technical issues, so please bear with us. Without further ado, we'll get started. Okay, so today we will be seeing advanced concepts in RC passages. We have already seen one class on introduction to RC. Okay, so I hope you remember what you've been taught in those classes. So that's the topic for today. Okay, so as always, we will be starting our class with a book suggestion. The book that I have today to suggest to all of you is something that is very important because of one or two reasons. Number one, it's not something that is generally on top 10 book suggestions that you should be looking at and all that. It is from your banking examination perspective. Now typically banking examination papers will find their passages from certain books, and Wings of Fire is one such book that lent an excerpt to one of these examinations. It's done that in the past. Okay. So Wings of Fire is written by Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam. Now all of you would know that he is a stalwart scientist who rose from very humble beginnings. So the book is something about that. Pick it up, read it, and for all that you might know, you might get an excerpt from one of Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam's books in your next examination. Okay. Alright, so that is about Wings of Fire. Let's get started with a recap of the previous class. The previous class, as I mentioned earlier, we dealt with an introduction to reading comprehension. Okay, so what is reading comprehension? You're given a passage and then based on the information presented in the passage, you're asked questions. Correct? So, ground rules here: read the passage, read the questions, look at the options, choose the one that is right. Okay, so that's the simple part. A few ground rules that we saw. Number one, whatever you know outside of the passage on the relevant topic, remember what you know outside is immaterial. All your questions will have to be answered with information that is present in the passage, nothing more, nothing less. Okay, and we look at the previous CPP and wherever you went wrong with the previous CPP question. Okay, so this is the question. What is the author's purpose in mentioning Friedman and Mozaffarian? Okay, now remember, whenever you have names, this again is something that I mentioned in the previous class. Whenever you are given names, okay, the statement that is given by them, that is very important. Okay, so what is the author's purpose in mentioning that? Number one, look at this. A, to get opinions of renowned doctors, to establish opposing viewpoints. Now, are Friedman and Mozaffarian saying anything contrary to one another? Okay, so that's not the case. Then, to get case studies from the doctors, nothing of that sort is mentioned. To understand the fatalities involved in heart diseases. Okay, now this is not the topic that has these two. Okay, now what is the author's purpose? Why did he bring them in? Because these are renowned doctors in that particular field. Okay, now option A is your answer. These two are doctors in this field. Whenever you are writing something, it is prudent that you to prove a point, you bring in expert opinions. These are the experts. Okay, so these are the experts whose opinion counts. Okay, now we go to reading comprehension advanced topics. First and foremost, we look at question types that have to do with implication, inference, and specific data match. Okay, now remember, with implication, inference. Okay, now these two, whenever you have this type of questions, remember that whatever is required for the answer is not explicitly stated in the passage. Using information that is given in the passage, you will have to figure out the answer. Okay, so remember that for implication and inference, you will have to look at implicit statement. What is the difference between explicitly stating something and implicitly stating something? Okay, for example, when I say, you know what, let's meet tomorrow, 5 o'clock in the morning, Lal Bagh. Okay, so we'll go for a run, and that is explicitly stated, 5 o'clock in the morning, Lal Bagh, date, time, venue. Okay, now you can infer a lot of this from the given statement. Number one, probably I like running. Two, I do not have any other appointment at 5 a.m. in the morning tomorrow. Okay, so remember that a lot of things can be inferred from a given statement. Okay, so that is to do with inference or implication. Then there is the specific data match question. Now this is nothing but picking up a certain piece of information from your passage and just marking that as your answer. Okay, for example, let's say the passage states reasons that a particular match was lost by the English cricket team. Okay, so when the question says which of the following, in the author's opinion, is the main reason for England's loss in the Ashes. Okay, so remember that you're just picking up something from the passage, putting it there as the answer. It's as simple as that. Okay, so now we've looked at inference and implication. Okay, so inference, remember, it is not explicitly stated. Okay, now one piece of advice that I would like to give you here is, do not repeat information already stated in the passage. Okay, so if it is a question on inference and implication, remember that you need to use your common sense. A, you need to read what is given. 2, you need to register, process what is given, and then you need to infer something based on that information and your common sense to figure out the answer. So do not repeat, do not choose an option that just repeats something that is already there in the passage. Savvy? Okay. Do you have any idea where I pick this from? I could have asked, okay, do you understand? Does that make sense? Okay, so savvy, question mark? Any idea where, which popular culture reference I am looking at right now when I say savvy? That's Captain Jack Sparrow from Pirates of the Caribbean. So now we look at the previous class contest question. Okay. So the question was to do with the antonym of dexterous. Now quite a few cases I have seen that people do know the meaning of a certain word, but they, in their hurry, they do not see that this is not synonymous but antonymous. Okay, so antonym means opposite, synonym is meaning. Okay, always look at this. So dexterous, what is the meaning of the word dexterous? Dexter's laboratory. Anyone? Why is he named Dexter? Dexterous means skillful. Okay. Now, maladroit and adroit are opposites to one another. Okay. Maladroit means unskilled. Okay. Lack of skill. Adroit, on the other well, it's on the other end of the spectrum. Adroit means skilled. In other words, dexterous and adroit are synonyms. Okay, vengeful, seeking revenge. Okay, murderous, well, looking, that is something very similar again to murderous. Okay, agile, murderous rage. Okay, agile, it means someone who's always on the run, someone who can get things done is very agile. He's an agile dancer. So physically very, on the run, and not on the run. He is very skilled in physical activities, or that is something, an agile person is someone who is very comfortable doing a few things. Okay, so this is what gives rise to the framework, the agile framework. Okay, so if you have a software job, you would have heard of agile processes. Okay, now maladroit is the opposite of dexterous, so this is your answer. Okay, adroit, maladroit. Are any other words that mean the same? Anyone? Hey, I'm sorry, I'm unable to look at comments today, so I might miss a few. Okay, so you can just let me know whatever you think. Anyhow, any ideas why I go for murderous and vengeful when I'm talking about dexterous? Yes, I'm talking about Dexter, the TV show that has to do with a serial killer. Okay, so I use, remember that these are psychological aids for me to kind of influence your mind and your thought process. The moment you see Dexter and then there is vengeful, murderous, you conveniently forget that this is an antonym that we are looking for. You would be looking at murderous. Okay, so that's not the case. Now it's contest time. Good luck. Contest question, well, I've picked it up from Harry Potter. Okay, so I hope you are a Harry Potter fan. If you aren't, well, pick a book, please start reading, and do not tell me that I'm a Harry Potter fan because I've watched the movies. No, if the movies come nowhere close to what the books give you in terms of experience, reader experience. Okay, so you're part of Hogwarts, you're part of the wizarding world when you read the books. Okay. So, who's your favorite Harry Potter character, by the way? My favorite Harry Potter character would be Professor Lupin. Okay, so we go on, we move away from the contest, and we look into an exercise. Okay, now I understand that most of you would have issues, would probably think that RC questions are very boring. Okay, now why would people say that? If you read regularly, if you enjoy reading, then remember that RC passages are where you can get most of your questions right. Okay, because there is nothing that is, whatever information that is being tested on, remember the information is already presented to you. That's like having the answers first and then reading the questions, right? So all you need to do is pick the right answer from the given information, okay, and all you do is put it in the right format. There you have your answer, correct? So typically this should be your easiest part, right? So we look at today's sample passage because, okay, today I've chosen a slightly larger passage. Last time, if you remember, right, because we were just starting with RC, I went for something very small in size. Okay, today for the next 25 minutes, we will be doing this passage. So, I've gone for a slightly long passage. Okay, so please read this. In today's economic climate, emerging markets account for more than half of the world's GDP on the basis of purchasing power, says the International Monetary Fund or the IMF. Now, whenever you read, remember, says Friedman, says Dr. Thomas Friedman. Okay, so such stuff, I tell you that whenever there is a name involved, you need to learn that very well. Now, instead of a name here, you have the IMF, blah, 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 says. So, whatever happens here is important. In the 1990s, it was about a third. In the late 90s, 30% in the developing world managed to increase their output per person faster than America did, thus achieving what is called catch-up growth. Now, wherever there is a definition, a terminology that you need to learn, I've put that in bold, okay. This catching up was somewhat lackadaisical, okay. Again, words that you might not know, I've put that in bold. Today, we'll not be looking at vocabulary questions with RC, by the way. We'll be looking only at the other kind of questions. Because vocabulary, we have already looked at in the first class, correct? So, the focus today is on the other kind of questions. But that doesn't mean that we wouldn't be looking at what lackadaisical means. Lackadaisical is, something you do very carelessly. The gap closed at just 1.5% a year. Some of this was due to slower growth in America, most was not. Now, they are giving reasons. Okay, that is very important. Reasons for why the gap closed at 1.5% a year. The most impressive growth was in 4 of the biggest emerging economies: Brazil, Russia, India and China. In short, it's the BRIC nations. These economies have grown in different ways and for different reasons. The remarkable growth of emerging markets in general and BRICS in particular transformed the global economy, and in many ways, some wrenching. Now, wrenching has a negative connotation, okay. When I say it's heart-wrenching, it's something that is twisting my heart, okay, and not in a nice manner, correct? So, we get the idea from the introductory passage that this is something that has positives and negatives, the entire passage. Now, we look at reasons, okay. Commodity prices soared. Cost of manufacture, labor, that sank, that came down. A growing and vastly more accessible pool of labor in emerging economies played a part in both wage stagnation and rising income equality in rich ones. Okay, global poverty rates tumbled, came down. Okay, tumbled means came down, soared, went up. Gaping economic imbalances fueled an era of financial vulnerability. What is vulnerability? Anyone? What is vulnerability? Hey, who are the ones here, by the way? Good morning to all of you. It would be great if you could say hi. So, when you're vulnerable to something, it means that you're very easy to be influenced, infected, damaged. You're in a very vulnerable position. Okay, you can be harmed very easily. That's vulnerable. Laid the groundwork for global crisis. As I said, we are looking at the negatives. The shift towards the emerging economies will continue, but always have an eye out for contrast indicators. Its most tumultuous phase seems to have more or less reached its end. Growth rates have dropped. The nature of their growth is in the process of changing too. Its new mode will have fewer direct effects on the rest of the world. The likelihood of growth in other emerging economies having an effect in the near future comparable to that of the BRICS in the recent past is low. The emerging giants will grow larger and their ranks will swell, but their tread will no longer shake the earth as it once did. Okay. Now, you see that I'm rushing through. Okay. A good reading practice, especially when it comes to your examination point of view, is that you read at once in a very fast manner. All you need to do is understand the context. You can always come back to refer when you have questions. Do not waste time in understanding something that you do not initially understand. Okay. After the 90s, there followed convergence with a vengeance. China's pivot towards liberalization in global markets came at a propitious time. Propitious means favorable in terms of politics, business and technology. Rich economies were feeling relaxed about globalization and account deficits. America, booming in confidence, was not troubled by the growth of China, okay, or by offshoring jobs to India. The technology necessary to assemble and maintain complex supply chains were coming into their own, allowing firms to expand their operations between countries and across oceans. So you had the technology to do some things. The tumbling costs, tumbling again, coming down, cost of shipping and communication sparked globalization's second unbundling. So you see that we deal with a lot of terminology here, right? So wherever you have a terminology term, remember that you need to understand that. That's very important. The first was the simple ability to provide consumers in one place with goods from another. Okay, so there is a market for avocado, for example, what we call the butter fruit. It was previously unheard of in most parts of the world. It was native to South America, and all of a sudden the world over saw avocados. Okay, so chili and avocados at that. So you have consumers everywhere. Source is only one point. You put every consumer place in touch with the source. That's the first unbundling. Second unbundling is something else. As longer supply chains infiltrated and connected places with large and fast growing working age populations, enormous quantities of cheap new labor became accessible. Okay. So infiltration, it has to do with connect. Okay. So advanced economies added about 160 million non-farm jobs between 1980 and 2010. In 2007, China's economy expanded by an eye-popping 14.2%, India 10.1%, Russia 8.5%, Brazil 6.1%. The IMF now reckons there will be slowdown in growth. China will grow by just 7.8%, India 5.6%, Russia and Brazil 2.5%. Okay. Now, whenever you have statistics, read it once, leave it. You need not really register the numbers, but have an eye on the trend. Does it go up? Does it go down? Okay. Here it goes down. Okay. The growth goes down. That is all that you need to register. Other countries have impressive growth potential. The next 11 or the N11 includes Bangladesh, Indonesia, Mexico, Nigeria and Turkey. But as I said, always have an eye peeled for contrast indicators. Okay, you say, the author says that there is scope, but there are various reasons to think that this N11 cannot have an impact on the same scale as that of the BRICS. First, now remember one more thing that I said, whenever you have first, second, third, that is important. Please read that, okay? Because these are arguments that conclude some way. We are very interested in that. The first is that these economies are smaller. The N11 has a population of just over blah blah. I am not interested in numbers, by the way. I'm just looking at trends. So it's not significant. That's all I understand from this. It is less than half of that of the BRICS. The second is that the N11 is richer now than the BRICS were back in the day. The third reason is that the performance of BRICS cannot be repeated is the success of that performance. The world economy is much larger than it used to be, twice as big in real terms as it was in 1992. So it's doubled according to IMF figures. But whether or not the world can build on a remarkable era of growth will depend in large part on whether the new giants tread a path towards greater global cooperation or stumble and fall in times of tumult and in the worst case fight. So you conclude with this statement. The conclusion is very important. Okay. So take a second to understand what the passage is about. The introduction was about emerging markets, what they did during the BRICS emergence, and then you go on to say that it cannot be repeated today, So in between you look into the negatives of the BRICS growth, So this is the passage. Now we look at questions, Which of the following is a reason for the passage author's prediction about N11 countries? This is a data match question, a specific data match question. So I am looking for reason N11. So I go back to N11. The next 11 includes blah blah. These are the various reasons. So the author predicts. So that's why I said, right, first, second, third. Please remember, whenever it is enumerated, remember to read that. It's very important. Economies are smaller. Why can the N11 not repeat the BRICS performance? According to the author, he predicts the economies are smaller. Then the N11 is richer now than the BRICS were earlier. Third reason is performance of the BRICS cannot be repeated, right? So I go to the question now. N11 countries are poorer. Eliminate. That's not the case. The author clearly states the opposite of that. I'm not even looking at the rest of the sentence, if you know what I mean. The size of these countries is too great to fuel a high rate of growth as expected by the BRIC countries. No, that's not what is stated. We saw the three reasons, correct? The world economy is so large that the magnitude of growth will have to be huge to equal the growth of BRICS. Yes, he concludes saying the world economy has gone up in scale, and by how much? It's doubled. So this is a contender. Then these economies are agricultural. Nothing is said about agricultural economies. None of these options. So this is your answer. So whenever there is enumeration, remember to read that very well. Take mental notes. Then we look at what does the author have to say about globalization's second unbundling. Now remember, I told you, whenever there is terminology being named and discussed, it's very important that you focus there. So we go to the place where he discusses second unbundling. So remember that this is to do with the first unbundling. Forget that. We are more interested in the second unbundling. As longer supply chains infiltrated and connected places with large and growing working age populations, enormous quantities of cheap new labor became accessible. That is what he says. So you are looking at the workforce. It proved beneficial since it created a large number of jobs and tremendous growth in cross-border trade. This talks about jobs, so it's possibly a contender. It disturbed the fragile balance of power among BRIC nations and caused internal strife. No, when it comes to second unbundling, this is not discussed. It caused untold damage to America's economy since it restricted the spread of American farms offshore, not discussed there in second unbundling. It proved most beneficial for the agricultural sector. Absolutely nothing about agriculture again. Citizens in advanced countries became much better off than those in emerging economies. There is no comparison between the citizens in either end of the spectrum. Okay, so the answer has to do with jobs, correct? This has to be your answer. Okay, so this is a very simple data match, specific data match question again. Okay, so this again is okay. What do the comparative statistics of 2007-2013 for BRICS countries published by the IMF as cited in the passage indicate? Now, indication is to do with inference or implication. Okay, so you're looking at something that is not explicitly stated in that part of the passage, but using this data, you need to figure out something. Okay, now you know that the trend was downward. You remember that? Okay, so I'll go back to the passage and show you. Look at this. This is the statistics that he talks about. China's economy expanded by 14.2%, India 10.1%, Russia 8.5%, Brazil 6.1%. But now from 14.2, it has come down to 7.8 in case of China. India from 10.1 it's come to 5.6. Russia and Brazil from 8.5 and 6.1 it's come to 2.5. So there is a downward trend. That is all you need to know. Now look at this. BRIC economies will contribute less to global growth. As the population of these countries grow, its growth rate is filling. The financial practices followed by these countries will continue to pay rich dividends. These countries are creating global financial imbalance to the detriment of smaller developing economies like Africa. Now, not much is said about smaller economies in Africa, so we call this out of scope. This is not discussed in the passage at all. IMS forecasts of growth rates for these countries have not been fulfilled. Okay, now remember that the numbers are to do with economy growth rate, correct? Which of these are to do with economic growth rate? This and this, correct? Nothing much is stated about this either. Practices, financial practices that are followed by these countries. No. The passage kind of concentrated on the richer countries, okay, them offshoring jobs and finding cheaper labor there, correct? So it's not about rich dividends in these countries, correct? Now look at this, BRIC economies will contribute less to global growth. Then IMS forecasts of growth rates for these countries have not been fulfilled. Now remember that we saw the downward trend, but did we see IMF forecast of growth rate? Please go back. Okay, do you find anything here to do with forecast? Nothing, right? So this again is out of scope when you talk about the author's forecast, sorry, the IMF's forecast. So this again is out of scope. What is this out of scope? Okay, Now, it's a very interesting thing in RC when people create questions. Let's say you are dealing with a topic, a passage that deals with the topic, best practices of CEOs in the banking industry within the Indian subcontinent. Okay, so my scope is very well defined. I'm talking about CEOs of banks in the Indian subcontinent. 3 degrees of complexity here, correct? Now, if I bring in something in the question answer session, if I bring in something about, say, banking officials from the Middle East, okay, now I can extend something using the information to say something about the others, but if the the questions and answer options have to do with if the answer options have to do with something outside of this scope, remember to eliminate it. Okay, for example, IMF forecast is not being discussed in the passage at all. Okay, so 1 is your answer. BRIC economies will contribute less. What effect did rising economies of BRICS have on the global economy? Okay, so this is kind of your entire passage. It helped stabilize the global economy, insulate it from the fallout. Okay, so this I see is a positive answer. Labor became highly skilled, wages were alarmingly increased, reducing the offshoring of jobs to developing countries. Okay, so was it reduced? We see that during the rise of these BRIC countries, more jobs went to the BRIC countries. Okay, so this might not be an option, but anyhow, let's look at this. Though worldwide poverty rates tumbled, the gap between the rich and the poor in rich economies have increased. Now, if you look at the now look at this particular part. Okay, as people got jobs, American jobs sitting in India, Brazil or Russia, look at this, places with large and fast growing working age populations, enormous quantities of cheap new labor became accessible. Okay, and then advanced economies added a lot of these non-farm jobs. Okay, and then you say that there was also an inequality. Okay, okay. So, though worldwide poverty rates tumbled, the gap between, so there was inequality in these countries. Okay, then cost of living and level of inflation in these countries were maintained at low levels. Okay, all the given options are effects on the rise in BRIC economies. Okay, now remember, did it stabilize the global economy and insulate it from global financial crisis? Nothing of that sort is discussed in the passage. Okay, then labor became skilled. Yeah, then though worldwide poverty, now this is a very strong contender, that inequality in these emerging countries kind of widened. Okay, so this is a very strong contender. Cost of living, this is not mentioned in the passage at all, out of scope. So because you have some that do not fit in as answers, 5 is eliminated because it says clearly that all the above are answers. So 3 is your answer. Okay, now the next question. What does the phrase mean? Their ranks will swell, but their tread will no longer shake the earth as it once did, convey in the context of the passage. Now remember, the passage is about the BRICS economy, those countries, okay, and how the N11 cannot repeat the BRICS performance, correct? Look at this, while many countries will try and achieve the same rate, they will not succeed. Possible, okay. Their ranks, here you mean the BRICS nations, okay, you mean the BRIC nations when you say their, you're talking about the BRIC nations. The growth of BRIC countries has changed the world's economy, that any further growth will not have such a disruptive effect on the world economy. Possible. Developing countries have strengthened their fiscal systems in such a way that they will not be shaken to such a large extent. Now this is to do with developing countries. Here the there is to do with BRIC. So this is not your answer. You are not connected with the other countries. Poverty may increase as the gap between the rich and the poor increase, but it will never reach the same levels. You're not talking about poverty reaching some levels in the passage, no. Citizens in advanced countries became much better off. No, there is no talk about citizens, correct? Now remember that so your answer options are between 1 and 2, correct? Any problem there? We've eliminated the rest. While many countries will try and achieve the same rate, they will not succeed. That is what you see about the N11, okay? Then 2, it has changed the economy in several ways. It will not have a disruptive effect. This is what the earth will no longer shake, blah 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 is all about. So 2 is your answer, okay. So the growth of BRIC countries, their ranks, you're talking about BRIC, here again you're talking about BRIC, then you say that the growth is already achieved, it's not possible once more. Then your last question, catch-up growth. I said terminology is important, correct? So this again is a specific data match question. What is catch-up growth? We saw that it is to do with, this is a very simple question, so I'm not even going back. The definition clearly said that in terms of output per person, the BRICS overdid what America was doing. That is catch-up growth, okay. So if you go back, you will see that clearly mentioned in the passage. So 4 is your answer here. The others do not even come close, okay. So again, another terminology, convergence with a vengeance, okay. What is convergence with a vengeance? You saw that America and other developed countries were open to free trade and globalization, and then they made huge technological advances that made it possible for them to have offshoring facilities in the BRIC nations, okay. So these two are right. They weren't threatened. The passage clearly states that America was not threatened by China's growth. So this is not part of your answer option. So the answer would be A and B. Okay. So with this we summarize. We did RC advanced concepts today. I hope it was a fruitful class for you guys. Okay. So we wrap up with a very quick summary. We did inference, implication and specific data match. Correct? Thanks for joining us. You all of you passport members, please rush to do your practice passage today. There are 10 questions based on what we've seen today, okay. So you can make use of whatever you've learned, apply that and look at your CPP questions, attempt them. You can share it with others. So good luck with your CPP. It's open only to passport members, by the way. So thanks for joining us. Bye. Have a great weekend.